The blood-red horizon painted the Texas sky as Pearl Davis clutched her swollen eye, stumbling through the brush that tore at her calico dress. Behind her, the shouts of men and the howling of tracking hounds pierced the dusk air of 1875. She wasn't alone. 3 other women scrambled alongside her, each bearing their own marks of brutality, each running from the same nightmare. "Keep moving," hissed Alina, the eldest among them at 26, her once elegant face marred by a jagged scar. "They'll catch us before sunrise if we don't make it to the river." Pearl nodded, though her entire body screamed for rest. At 22, she'd endured 5 years of marriage to a man whose fists spoke louder than his words. Tonight was their chance, perhaps their only chance to escape the mining settlement that had become their prison. Beside her, 19-year-old, Marion sobbed quietly, clutching a crude bundle containing her infant son. Sarah, barely 20, limped forward on a badly twisted ankle, refusing to slow their desperate flight. "The water will mask our scent," Pearl whispered, remembering tales her grandfather had told of escaping slave hunters before the war. "But we need to hurry." The distant barking grew closer, accompanied by the telltale sound of hoofbeats. The women exchanged terrified glances. They wouldn't make it to the river in time. "This way." Pearl tugged them toward a dense thicket, praying it might conceal them long enough for the search party to pass. As they huddled in the brambles, the thundering approach of horses made the ground beneath them tremble. Pearl pressed Marion's baby to her chest, silently begging the child not to cry as torchlight flickered through the trees. "Spread out." A gruff voice commanded Thomas Miller, Alina's husband and the self-appointed leader of their pursuers. "These whores can't have gotten far. $50 to the man who finds them first." Pearl's heart hammered so violently she feared the men might hear it. The mining camp's justice would be swift and merciless for runaway wives. A public whipping would be the kindest punishment they could hope for. Suddenly, the baby whimpered. Pearl froze, watching in horror as the nearest torch swung toward their hiding spot. "Over there," someone shouted. "Run." Alina screamed, shoving Pearl forward. They burst from the thicket, abandoning any pretense of stealth. Pearl clutched Marion's arm as they crashed through the underbrush, the angry shouts growing louder behind them. A shot cracked through the night. Sarah cried out, stumbling forward but somehow maintaining her footing. Another shot, this one splintering bark inches from Pearl's head. "There's the river," Marion gasped, pointing toward the sound of rushing water. Before they could reach it, riders appeared directly in their path. Pearl skidded to a halt, nearly colliding with a towering bay stallion. Its rider loomed above them, silhouetted against the night sky. "Please," Pearl gasped, instinctively shielding the others with her body. "Please help us." For a heart-stopping moment, the rider said nothing. Then he turned his horse to face the approaching mob. "Evening, gentlemen," he called, his voice surprisingly gentle despite its commanding tone. "Seems you've got quite a hunt underway." Thomas Miller rode to the front, his face contorted with rage. "Stand aside, stranger. Those are our wives, and they're coming home to learn their place." The horseman tilted his head slightly. "Is that so?" He glanced back at the 4 terrified women. "Ladies, are these your husbands?" "They'll kill us if we go back," Alina said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "Finn," another man spat, "this ain't your business. Those women are our property by law." The stranger Finn shifted in his saddle. When he spoke again, his voice had hardened to steel. "No human being is property in this country anymore. That war's been over for 10 years. Those are our wives." Thomas roared. "And they're leaving you," Finn replied simply. The moonlight caught the star pinned to his vest, a Texas Ranger's badge. "Now, I suggest you boys turn around and head back to your camp before this gets uglier than it needs to be." "There's one of you and 12 of us," Thomas sneered, raising his rifle. In a fluid motion that Pearl could barely follow, Finn drew his revolver. "I count 6 shots here and I rarely miss. You feeling lucky tonight, Miller?" A tense silence followed. Pearl could hear Sarah's labored breathing beside her, smell the gunpowder and sweat hanging in the air. Finally, Thomas lowered his weapon. "This ain't over," he growled. "The law's on our side." "Not tonight it isn't," Finn replied evenly. "These women are free to go now as long as I stand." After a moment of furious glaring, Thomas wheeled his horse around. "Come on, boys. We'll settle this another way." The posse retreated slowly, some casting threatening glances over their shoulders. Only when the last rider disappeared into the darkness did Finn holster his weapon and turn to face the women. In the moonlight, Pearl could finally see him clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that suggested he was in his early 30s. Dark hair curled beneath his hat, and his eyes, when they met hers, were the deep blue of twilight. "Are any of you hurt?" he asked, dismounting. Sarah stepped forward, revealing a bloodstain spreading across her sleeve. "Just grazed me," she said, though her face had gone pale. Finn nodded. "I've got a cabin about 2 miles upstream. You'll be safe there tonight. Can you all walk?" Pearl found her voice at last. "Yes, and thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said grimly. "Those men won't give up so easily, but for tonight at least you're safe." As he helped Sarah onto his horse and led them along the riverbank, Pearl felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Fragile but unmistakable, like the first green shoot after a long winter. The cabin was small but solid, nestled against a ridge that sheltered it from the worst of the prairie winds. Inside, a single room housed a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, and basic furnishings that spoke of a solitary life. "It's not much," Finn said, lighting a lantern, "but it's dry and defensible." While he tended to Sarah's wound, Pearl took stock of their situation. They had escaped with nothing but the clothes they wore and whatever they'd managed to bundle in their hasty flight. Marion's baby miraculously had fallen asleep against her shoulder. "You're a ranger?" Eleanor asked, eyeing the badge Finn had set aside while he worked. "Finn Reynolds," he confirmed. "Though I'm ranging less these days, mostly I keep to myself out here." "Why did you help us?" Pearl asked quietly, his hand stilled for a moment as he finished bandaging Sarah's arm. "Some things a man can't ride past and still call himself a man afterward." He looked up, meeting Pearl's gaze directly. "I heard what was happening in that mining camp. Should have stepped in sooner." "They would have killed you," Eleanor said flatly. "There are 40 men there, most meaner than snakes." Finn shrugged. "Maybe, but tonight at least I evened the odds a bit." He stood, rolling down his sleeves. "You ladies take the bed, I'll keep watch outside." "Mr. Reynolds," Pearl called as he reached the door. "Our husbands, they won't give up, Thomas Miller especially. He's killed men for less than this." Finn nodded, his expression unreadable. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out where to take you that's safe." After he left, the women collapsed in exhaustion. Even with the immediate danger past, Pearl found sleep elusive. Her mind raced with possibilities and fears. Where could they possibly go? What life awaited runaway wives with no money, no skills beyond what they'd learned in their harsh existence? She slipped outside shortly before dawn, finding Finn seated on the porch steps, rifle across his knees. "You should be sleeping," he said without turning around. "So should you." Pearl sat beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. "Have they come back?" "Not yet, but they will." He glanced at her, taking in her bruised face with a carefully neutral expression. "How long were you married?" 5 years. Since I was 17. Pearl wrapped her arms around herself against the pre-dawn chill. "My father arranged it. Thought Thomas Miller's claim would make me a wealthy woman someday." And instead, I learned how quickly a man can change once the preacher's words are spoken. She traced the fading bruise around her wrist. Eleanor has it worst. Her husband killed her first baby in one of his rages. Kicked her so hard she can't have more now. Finn's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. Where were you ladies heading? Denver. Marion has a cousin there who might take us in. Pearl sighed. Though how we'd get there, I don't rightly know. They sat in companionable silence as the first pale streaks of dawn appeared on the horizon. Finally, Finn spoke. I can get you to the railroad at Cedar Springs. It's 3 days' ride from here. From there, you can take the train north. Pearl looked at him in surprise. You do that? Why? For the first time, a hint of a smile touched his lips. Maybe I've got my own ghosts to answer to, Miss Davis. Pearl, she corrected softly. Pearl, he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her heart flutter strangely. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the cabin door opening. Eleanor stepped out, her face grave. Sarah's fever's rising, she reported. The wound's worse than we thought. Finn stood immediately. I'll ride to town for a doctor. No, Pearl caught his arm. They'll be watching for that. Miller has friends in every settlement within 50 miles. He considered this, then nodded. There's a Cheyenne healer about 10 miles north. She knows me. I helped her son once. I'll bring her back instead. And leave us undefended, Eleanor challenged. Finn disappeared into the cabin, returning moments later with a shotgun and a revolver. Either of you ladies know how to use these? Pearl took the revolver, checking it with practiced hands. My grandfather taught me. After the war, he never trusted that trouble wouldn't find us again. Finn's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. Keep watch from the south window. It gives the best view of the approach. I'll be back before midday. He saddled his horse quickly, pausing before he mounted. If they come, fire a warning shot. It'll echo through these hills. I'll hear it and come running. Pearl nodded, tightening her grip on the weapon. Be careful. Always am. With a tip of his hat, he swung into the saddle and rode north, quickly disappearing among the trees. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah's condition worsened, her skin burning with fever as Eleanor tried to cool her with damp cloths. Marion tended to her baby, singing soft lullabies when he fussed. Pearl kept watch, dividing her attention between the window and helping the others as needed. Just before noon, she spotted movement in the distance, a lone rider approaching fast. Someone's coming, she called, raising the revolver. Eleanor joined her at the window, squinting. It's not Finn. Horse is different. Pearl's heart raced as she recognized the rider. It's Brett Wilson. He works for Thomas. Is he alone? Marion asked fearfully. Pearl scanned the horizon carefully. Seems to be, for now. What do we do? What Finn said, fire a warning. Pearl stepped onto the porch and aimed the revolver skyward, squeezing the trigger. The report echoed across the valley. Brett Wilson pulled his horse up short, clearly startled by the shot. After a moment's hesitation, he continued forward at a more cautious pace. That's far enough, Pearl called when he was within earshot. She kept the revolver steady, pointed directly at his chest. Now, Pearl, Brett called, raising his hands slightly. I just came to talk. Then talk from there. He frowned but didn't advance further. Thomas sent me to offer terms. You ladies come back peaceful-like and there won't be any punishment, fresh start. Eleanor laughed bitterly from the doorway behind Pearl. We know what his fresh starts look like. You don't have many options, Brett continued, his voice hardening. That ranger can't protect you forever. Thomas has friends in high places. Judge in Cedar Springs owes him favors. You'll be declared insane and locked up or charged with theft for taking yourselves away. Pearl felt a cold knot form in her stomach. What he said was all too possible. The law rarely sided with wives against husbands. "Tell Thomas we're not coming back," she said firmly. "Not today, not ever." Brett's expression darkened. "He said you'd be difficult. Said to tell you he'll be coming himself next time with enough men to handle one lone ranger, and when he does—" He let the threat hang in the air. "Deliver your message and go," Pearl responded, raising the revolver higher. With a contemptuous snort, Brett wheeled his horse around. "You'll regret this, Pearl. All of you will." They watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then Pearl lowered the weapon with trembling hands. "He's right," Marion whispered. "The law won't help us." "Finn will be back soon," Pearl replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We'll figure something out." It was nearly 2 hours later when Finn returned, accompanied by an elderly native woman carrying a leather satchel. He dismounted quickly, his expression tense. "I heard the shot." "What happened?" Pearl explained Brett's visit while the healer went inside to tend to Sarah. Finn listened intently, his brow furrowing. "Wilson's right about one thing," he admitted when she finished. "The law in these parts often looks the other way when it comes to how a man treats his wife." "Then we truly have nowhere to go," Alina said bleakly. Finn shook his head. "I didn't say that. There's a settlement about 100 miles west, New Hope. It was started after the war by women who'd lost everything. They don't much welcome men there except for trading, but they might take you in." 100 miles, Pearl looked doubtful. "We'd never make it on foot, and we have no horses." "You have me," Finn said simply. "And I have a wagon stored in a ravine about 5 miles from here. It's not much, but it'll get us there." "Why would you do this for us?" Alina asked suspiciously. "What do you want in return?" A shadow passed across Finn's face. "Not everything in this world is a transaction, madam. Sometimes a person just does what's right." Before Alina could respond, the healer emerged from the cabin. She spoke to Finn in a mixture of English and Cheyenne, gesturing emphatically. "What's she saying?" Pearl asked anxiously. "Sarah needs rest at least 2 days before she can travel," Finn translated. "The infection's bad, but walking flower has given her medicine that should help." Pearl exchanged worried glances with Alina. "We don't have 2 days. Not if Thomas is gathering men." Finn nodded grimly. "I know. Which is why we need to move you tonight, just to a different location. I have another place, a line shack about 15 miles west. It's more remote, harder to find." "And Sarah?" Marion asked. "We'll make a stretcher. It won't be comfortable for her, but it's better than staying here where they know to look." He turned to the healer, speaking in her language. She nodded, patting the satchel at her side. "She'll come with us," he explained. "Keep treating Sarah until she's well enough for the longer journey." As night fell, they prepared to leave. Finn had fashioned a stretcher for Sarah from blankets and branches, securing it between 2 horses he'd brought back with him. The healer walking flower had mixed a potion for Sarah that had eased her into a fitful sleep. "We'll travel through the night," Finn explained as he helped Pearl secure their meager belongings. "It's safer and cooler for the horses." Under the silver light of a 3/4 moon, their small procession moved silently through the hills. Finn led the way, followed by the horses bearing Sarah's stretcher. Pearl walked alongside, one hand resting on the stretcher to steady it over rough patches. Alina and Walking Flower came next, with Marion and her baby bringing up the rear. The night was alive with sounds: the soft hooting of owls, the distant howling of coyotes, the whisper of wind through tall grass. Pearl found herself watching Finn's broad shoulders ahead of her, drawing strength from his quiet confidence. "How did you become a ranger?" she asked softly when they paused to rest the horses. Finn glanced at her, surprise flickering across his features before he answered. "After the war, there wasn't much left of the life I knew. My family's ranch was gone. parents both dead from fever. Ranging seemed a good way to keep moving. You fought for the Confederacy. Pearl's grandfather had been a Union man, though Texas had sided with the South. I fought, Finn said carefully, because I was 17 and didn't know better. Learned quick enough what we were really fighting for, though. His expression darkened with memories. Doesn't sit right with me, men claiming ownership over others. Pearl understood then why he'd stopped to help them. Your badge, you said you're ranging less these days. Turned it in officially last month. He adjusted his hat. Too many orders I couldn't stomach. Told to look the other way too often when the powerful wronged the weak. They continued through the night, stopping only briefly to rest. Dawn was breaking when Finn led them into a narrow valley hidden between two rocky ridges. At its center stood a small, weather-beaten cabin nearly invisible among the surrounding pines. It's not much, he said as they approached, but it's safer than the other place. Nobody knows about this one except me. The line shack was crude but serviceable, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table, and platform beds built into the walls. Finn helped them settle Sarah onto one of the beds while Walking Flower immediately began preparing fresh poultices. I need to conceal our trail, Finn said once they were all inside, and check if we were followed. I'll be back before sunset. Be careful, Pearl said, the words escaping before she could consider them. Something in his eyes softened as he looked at her. Always am. After he'd gone, the women worked to make the cabin habitable. Alina found and patched a leak in the roof. Marion discovered dried beans and cornmeal in a storage bin that had been protected from mice. Pearl ventured to a nearby stream for water, keeping the revolver Finn had given her close at hand. By mid-afternoon, they had established a semblance of order. Sarah's fever had broken, though she remained weak. Walking Flower communicated through gestures and the few English words she knew, showing Pearl how to prepare the medicinal tea she'd brought. As promised, Finn returned before sunset, bringing with him 2 rabbits he'd snared. No sign of pursuit yet, he reported as he cleaned his catch outside. But that doesn't mean they've given up. That evening, they shared a simple meal of rabbit stew. For the first time since their desperate flight began, Pearl felt a moment of peace. Watching Finn interact gently with Marion's baby, she glimpsed a different side of this solitary man, one that stirred feelings she'd thought beaten out of her years ago. Later, as the others slept, Pearl joined Finn on the cabin's small porch. The night air carried the scent of pine and distant rain. Tell me about New Hope, she said, wrapping a borrowed blanket around her shoulders. Finn leaned against the doorframe. It was started by a woman named Catherine Barlow after she lost her husband and sons at Gettysburg. Instead of giving up, she gathered other war widows and headed west. They built something remarkable, a place where women make the decisions, run the businesses, enforce the rules. And they don't allow men to stay. They're cautious with good reason. Men can trade there, conduct business, but they can't settle. He gave a small smile. Can't say I blame them given what many have suffered at men's hands. Pearl studied his profile in the moonlight. Yet you help them. I supply game sometimes, help with repairs when asked. He shrugged. Catherine saved my life once when I was tracking outlaws. Took a bullet meant for me. She sounds remarkable. She is. Reminds me a bit of you, actually. Pearl looked away, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. I'm nothing special, just a woman who finally found the courage to run. That takes more strength than most men will ever know, Finn said quietly. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of a horse's whinny. Finn straightened immediately, hand moving to his weapon. Stay here, he murmured, slipping into the shadows. Pearl waited, heart pounding, until he returned several minutes later. "Just a wild Mustang," he reported, though his expression remained vigilant. "But we should be more careful. No fire tomorrow, and we'll keep voices low. How soon can we leave for New Hope?" "Sarah needs at least one more day. Then it's 5 days hard travel if the weather holds." He glanced at the sky. "Storm's coming. Might buy us some extra time. Thomas won't expect us to travel in bad weather." That night, Pearl dreamed of her grandfather's farm, the only place she'd ever felt truly safe. In the dream, she was hanging laundry while a faceless man worked the fields nearby. A child's laughter echoed from the porch. She woke with tears on her cheeks, aching for a life she'd never had. The next day passed in tense vigilance. The promised storm arrived mid-morning, bringing driving rain that drummed against the cabin's roof. Sarah continued to improve under walking Flower's care, managing to sit up and take broth by evening. "We'll leave tomorrow," Finn announced as they gathered around the table. "Storm's passing east. We'll head west at first light." "What about the wagon you mentioned?" Alina asked. "I'll retrieve it tonight. It's hidden about 3 miles from here." He turned to Pearl. "Would you come with me? I could use another pair of eyes, and you're the best shot among the ladies." Pearl nodded, surprised and oddly pleased by his assessment. After the others had retired for the night, she and Finn set out under clearing skies. The rain had left the world smelling fresh, the ground soft beneath their feet. They walked in companionable silence for a time, Finn occasionally pointing out landmarks visible in the moonlight. When they reached a steep ravine, he led her down a narrow path to where an old farm wagon lay hidden beneath a canvas tarp and branches. "It's not pretty," he said as they uncovered it, "but the axles are sound and the wheels good. It'll get you to New Hope." Together they cleared away the concealment and checked the wagon's condition. As Pearl helped him grease the wheel hubs, their hands brushed. The simple contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Sorry," she murmured, drawing back. Finn paused, his eyes finding hers in the moonlight. "No need to apologize. Not ever with me." Something in his gaze made Pearl's breath catch. For 5 years, she'd trained herself to flinch from a man's touch, to expect pain rather than gentleness. Yet here was a man who looked at her with respect, who saw her strength rather than seeking to break it. "Why are you really helping us?" she asked softly. "The truth, please." Finn was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and raw with emotion. "I had a sister once, younger than me by 6 years. After our parents died, I left her with an uncle while I went to war. When I came back." He swallowed hard. "She'd married a man who seemed respectable, a banker, but behind closed doors he was a monster." Pearl's heart ached, already sensing where the story led. "By the time I found out, it was too late. She was gone, thrown herself into the river rather than endure another day with him." His hands tightened on the wagon wheel. "The law did nothing. Said a man had the right to discipline his wife as he saw fit." "I'm sorry," Pearl whispered, understanding now the pain that drove him. "I couldn't save her," Finn said simply. "But maybe I can help save you." Without thinking, Pearl reached out, gently touching his arm. "You already have." Their eyes met again, and for a breathless moment, Pearl thought he might move closer. Instead, he cleared his throat and stepped back. "We should get the wagon back to the cabin," he said. "Dawn comes early." As they worked together to harness Finn's horses to the wagon, Pearl felt something shifting inside her, a wall beginning to crumble, a heart learning to trust again. The journey began at first light. Sarah, still weak but alert, lay on a pallet in the wagon bed with walking Flower beside her. Marion and her baby rode with them, while Alina walked alongside. Finn rode ahead, constantly scanning the horizon for signs of danger. Pearl took the driver's seat, handling the reins with growing confidence. They traveled westward, keeping to less traveled routes and crossing open country where possible to avoid towns or settlements where Thomas might have allies. The first 2 days passed without incident, bolstering their cautious hope. On the third day, as they made camp in a sheltered grove, Pearl noticed Finn seemed distracted, his gaze frequently turning eastward. "Something's wrong," she said quietly when they were alone gathering firewood. "Maybe nothing," he replied, though his expression remained troubled. "Saw dust on the horizon earlier. Could be travelers, could be a search party. Should we move on? Travel through the night?" He considered this, then shook his head. "The horses need rest, and so does Sarah. We'll post watches tonight, you and I. Elena knows enough about firearms to take a shift too." That night, as the others slept, Pearl took the first watch. She sat on a fallen log at the edge of their camp, revolver across her lap, straining her eyes against the darkness. When Finn came to relieve her near midnight, she found herself reluctant to leave. "You need sleep," he said gently. "So do you." He smiled faintly. "I've gone longer without. Rangers learn to sleep with one eye open." "Tell me more about New Hope," she said, shifting to make room for him on the log. "What will we do there?" "Whatever you want," he replied, settling beside her. "They need all sorts: teachers, seamstresses, cooks. Some women run the trading post, others tend livestock. A few even work claims in the foothills: gold and silver." Pearl tried to imagine such a life, one where women made their own choices, answered to no man's authority. "It sounds like a dream." "It's real enough," Finn assured her. "Hard work, but good people. They'll welcome you." "And you?" she asked, suddenly bold. "Will you just leave us there and ride away?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," he admitted finally. "My plan was just to see you safely there." Pearl nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course, you have your own life." "Not much of one," he said softly. "Ranger work's done for me. Been thinking of heading further west, maybe California." "Running away?" she asked, recognizing something familiar in his restlessness. He met her gaze, a rueful smile touching his lips. "Maybe, same as you. I'm not running away anymore," Pearl said with sudden certainty. "I'm running towards something. A life I choose, not one forced upon me." Finn's expression softened. "You're a remarkable woman, Pearl Davis." Their eyes held for a long moment. Pearl felt herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Finn remained perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the fragile connection between them. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. Instantly, Finn was on his feet, gun drawn. "Wake the others," he whispered. Quietly. While Pearl roused Elena and Marion, Finn moved silently to the edge of the clearing, disappearing into the shadows. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited, the women huddled protectively around Sarah and the baby. When Finn returned, his expression was grim. "Riders, at least 6, maybe more. They've stopped about a half-mile east." "Thomas?" Elena asked fearfully. "Can't be sure, but it seems likely." He began gathering their essential supplies. "We need to move, now. Leave the wagon, we'll travel faster on horseback." "Sarah can't ride," Pearl protested. "I'll take her with me," Finn decided. "Walking Flower can ride with Elena. Marion, you and the baby with Pearl." They worked quickly in the darkness, saddling horses and distributing supplies. Finn fashioned a sling to secure Marion's baby against Pearl's chest, leaving her hands free for the reins. When Sarah whimpered in pain as they moved her, Walking Flower pressed a small leather pouch into Finn's hand, explaining through gestures that it contained medicine for the journey. Just before dawn, they set out westward, leaving the wagon as a decoy. Finn led them through a rocky ravine, following a route that would be difficult to track. As the sun rose, Pearl glanced back to see smoke rising from the direction of their abandoned camp. "They found the wagon," she said when they paused to water the horses. Finn nodded grimly. "And they'll be coming after us. We need to make better time." They pushed onward through the day, stopping only when absolutely necessary. By nightfall, Sarah was feverish again, the rough journey aggravating her wound. They made camp in a shallow cave, where Finn built a small, smokeless fire for warmth. "How much further to New Hope?" Pearl asked as Walking Flower tended to Sarah. "2 days if we push hard," Finn replied, studying a crude map he'd drawn in the dirt. "But we'll need to cross open country tomorrow, nowhere to hide if they spot us." Elinor voiced what they all feared. "They won't stop hunting us, will they? Not until they find us." "Men like Thomas Miller don't give up easily," Finn acknowledged. "But New Hope has its own defenses." "You'll be safe there." That night they took turns keeping watch again. When Pearl relieved Finn in the darkest hours before dawn, she found him staring intently at the fire, lost in thought. "You should rest," she said softly, settling beside him. "In a minute." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Pearl, there's something you should know if things go badly tomorrow." She laid a hand on his arm. We'll make it." "I hope so. But if we're separated, you need to keep heading west. Follow the North Star at night and during the day." He pulled a small brass compass from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. "Take this. Stay on a westward course until you reach a river with red banks. Follow it north for about 10 miles and you'll see the settlement." Pearl closed her fingers around the compass, aware that he was entrusting her with more than just a tool for navigation. "We won't be separated. Promise me you'll get the others there safely if I can't." His voice was urgent, his gaze intense. "I promise," she whispered, "but you'll be with us." "I know it." The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for travel, but also perfect visibility for anyone searching for them. They set out at first light, Finn setting a brisk pace. By mid-morning, they had reached the open prairie he'd warned about, miles of grassland with little cover, except occasional stands of cottonwoods along dry creek beds. "We'll make for those hills," Finn said, pointing to distant elevations that shimmered in the heat. "Once we're across this stretch, the terrain gets rougher. Easier to lose pursuit." They rode steadily through the morning, the sun beating down mercilessly. Pearl's shirt clung to her back with sweat, and the baby fussed in his sling. Behind her, she could hear Sarah's labored breathing as she clung to Finn. They had just reached a shallow creek when Elinor suddenly pointed eastward. "Riders!" Pearl turned to see a cloud of dust on the horizon, moving rapidly in their direction. Even at this distance, she could make out at least 8 horsemen. "They've spotted us," Finn said grimly. "Make for the creek bed. It's our only cover." They urged their tired horses forward, splashing into the shallow water and following its meandering course. The creek bed deepened, its banks rising on either side to provide some shelter from view. For nearly an hour they followed this natural path, hoping to put distance between themselves and their pursuers. But the creek was taking them southward, away from their destination. "We need to leave the water," Finn finally decided. "There's a cut bank ahead that should hide our exit." One by one, they climbed the steep bank, emerging onto the prairie once more. The dust cloud was no longer visible, but Pearl felt no relief their hunters were too determined to give up so easily. They rode hard for the hills, pushing their exhausted horses to the limit. By mid-afternoon they had reached the first rocky slopes, finding shelter in a jumble of boulders and scrub oak. "We'll rest here," Finn announced, helping Sarah down from his horse. "The animals need water and so do we." While Marion and Walking Flower tended to Sarah, Finn and Pearl led the horses to a tiny spring they'd discovered seeping from the rocks. Alina kept watch from a high point, rifle at the ready. "How is she?" Finn asked when they returned, nodding toward Sarah. "Getting weaker," Pearl replied quietly. "The journey's too hard on her." He frowned, scanning their surroundings. "There's an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles from here. Not much, but it would give her shelter while we riders—" Alina's urgent call interrupted him. Coming fast from the east, they scrambled to their vantage point, where Alina pointed toward the prairie below. A group of horsemen was approaching rapidly, too rapidly to outrun. "It's Thomas," Alina said, her voice tight with fear. "I recognize his sorrel stallion." Finn's expression hardened. "You ladies take the horses and head northwest following that ridge. I'll hold them here by you some time." "No," Pearl grabbed his arm. "There are too many. They'll kill you." "Better me than all of us," he said firmly. "Get to New Hope, you promised." Pearl looked at him desperately, realizing with sudden clarity that she couldn't bear to lose him. Not this man who had become her protector, her friend, perhaps something more. "We stay together," she insisted. "The ridge has cover, rocks, trees. We can defend it better than this open spot." Finn hesitated, clearly torn between sending them to safety and keeping them where he could protect them. "She's right," Alina said unexpectedly. "We've come too far to separate now." After a moment, Finn nodded. "Northwest ridge, stay low and move fast." They gathered their belongings and mounted quickly. As they crested the ridge, following its spine toward denser forest, the sound of pursuit grew louder below them. "There!" Thomas Miller's voice carried clearly in the still air. "Up on the ridge." A shot rang out, splintering bark from a tree near Pearl's head. She ducked instinctively, clutching the baby closer to her chest. "Faster," Finn urged, taking the lead as they plunged into the forest. For several minutes they weaved through the trees, the sounds of pursuit fading slightly as the terrain became more difficult for horses. Then Sarah cried out in pain as Finn's mount stumbled on the uneven ground. "We need to stop," he called. "She's slipping." They reined in beside a massive fallen tree, its upturned roots creating a natural barricade. Finn helped Sarah down, laying her in the shelter of the root ball. "How far behind are they?" Alina asked anxiously. "Not far enough." Finn checked his weapons grimly. "This is as good a place as any to make a stand." Pearl felt a cold certainty settle over her. This was the moment that would determine all their fates. Glancing at the other women, at Sarah's pale face, at Marion clutching her baby, at Alina's determined expression, she knew she would fight to her last breath to protect them. "3 guns," she said, counting their firearms. "How much ammunition?" "Enough," Finn replied, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "Pearl, get the others behind the tree. I'll take position on that outcrop. Better angle." She nodded, helping the women into the relative safety of their natural fortress. Walking Flower began crushing herbs for Sarah, while Marion huddled with her baby in the deepest part of the shelter. Pearl checked her revolver one final time before joining Finn at his position. He glanced at her in surprise. "You should stay with the others." "I'm a better shot than Alina," she said simply. "You need me here." A complex emotion crossed his face, admiration mingled with concern and something deeper that made her heart quicken. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching riders reached them. "Remember," he said quietly, "aim for the horses first. Unseating them gives us an advantage." Pearl nodded, steeling herself as the first riders came into view below them. Thomas Miller led the group, his face contorted with rage even at this distance. Behind him rode 7 men, including Brett Wilson and others Pearl recognized from the mining camp. All were armed, their rifles glinting in the afternoon sun. "Hold your fire until they are closer," Finn murmured. The riders approached cautiously, clearly aware they were entering an ambush zone. Thomas raised his hand, signaling his men to spread out among the trees. "Pearl," he shouted, his voice echoing through the forest. "We know you're up there. Send out the ranger and we'll let you women live." Pearl remained silent, her finger steady on the trigger. "Last chance." Thomas called after a moment. "Come out now or we start shooting." In answer, Finn fired a single shot that kicked up dirt directly in front of Thomas's horse. The animal reared in panic, nearly unseating its rider. "Next one won't miss," Finn called calmly. "Turn around and ride away, Miller. This doesn't have to end in blood." Thomas steadied his horse, his face darkening with fury. "Kill the ranger," he ordered. "The women are mine." Gunfire erupted from below as the men opened fire on their position. Pearl and Finn returned fire methodically, forcing the attackers to take cover. From behind the fallen tree, Eliner's rifle cracked, dropping one of the miners from his saddle. For several minutes, the forest echoed with the exchange of gunfire. Pearl lost track of time, focused entirely on the rhythm of aim, fire, reload. Beside her, Finn moved with fluid efficiency, each shot finding its mark. 2 of Thomas's men were down, a third clutching a wounded arm, but the odds were still against them and their ammunition wouldn't last forever. "We need to fall back," Finn said during a lull in the firing. "They're trying to flank us from the west." Pearl nodded, counting her remaining bullets. "Only 3 left. I'll cover you. Get the others ready to move." As Finn crawled back toward the fallen tree, a movement caught Pearl's eye. Brett Wilson was working his way up the slope, using trees for cover. He hadn't seen her yet, his attention focused on Finn's retreating figure. Pearl raised her revolver, took careful aim, and fired. Brett jerked backward, clutching his shoulder, but managed to retain his grip on his weapon. Before she could fire again, he swung his rifle toward her and pulled the trigger. Fire exploded across Pearl's upper arm as the bullet grazed her. She fell back with a cry of pain, momentarily stunned. Through a haze of agony, she saw Brett advancing, raising his rifle for a killing shot. A deafening blast echoed through the forest. Brett's chest erupted in red as he crumpled to the ground. Behind him stood Finn, his expression cold as he lowered his shotgun. "Pearl." He was beside her in an instant, examining her wound. "How bad?" "Just a graze," she gasped, though the pain suggested otherwise. "We need to move." Finn helped her to her feet, supporting her as they retreated to the others. Walking Flower immediately began examining Pearl's arm while Finn conferred with Eliner. "There's a ravine about a quarter-mile north," he said, reloading his weapons. "If we can reach it, we'll have better cover for a retreat." "The horses?" Eliner asked. "We'll have to leave them. They're too exposed and we'll move faster on foot through these woods." Pearl winced as Walking Flower bound her arm with strips of cloth. "Sarah can't walk that far." "I'll carry her," Finn decided. "Eliner, you take the baby. Marion and Walking Flower help Pearl. We move in 2 minutes." As they prepared to leave, the gunfire from below intensified. Thomas was directing his remaining men in a coordinated assault on their position. "Now," Finn ordered, lifting Sarah in his arms. "Stay low and keep moving no matter what." They abandoned their shelter, running in a crouched position toward the northern edge of the ridge. Behind them, bullets thudded into trees and whined off rocks. Pearl's wounded arm throbbed with each step, but she forced herself to keep pace, supported by Marion and Walking Flower. They had almost reached the ravine when a shout from behind made Pearl turn. Thomas had broken through their defensive line and was charging directly toward them, rifle raised. "Keep going," Finn called, passing Sarah to Eliner. He turned to face Thomas, drawing his revolver in one smooth motion. The 2 men fired simultaneously. Thomas's bullet whizzed past Finn's head, close enough to knock his hat off. Finn's shot caught Thomas in the chest, staggering him backward. For a moment, Thomas remained upright, a look of disbelief on his face. Then he toppled slowly to the ground. The remaining pursuers, seeing their leader fall, hesitated in their advance. Finn seized the opportunity, herding the women into the shelter of the ravine. They scrambled down its steep sides, finding cover among the rocks and undergrowth at the bottom. "Is everyone all right?" Finn asked, scanning their group. Pearl nodded, though her arm felt as if it were on fire. Sarah lay pale and still in Alina's arms, but her chest rose and fell steadily. Marion clutched her baby, who had remarkably remained silent throughout the ordeal. "Will they follow us?" Alina asked, glancing back up the ravine. "Not immediately," Finn replied. "They'll tend to their wounded first, but we can't stay here long." They rested briefly, drinking from a small stream that trickled along the ravine floor. Walking Flower prepared more medicine for Sarah and examined Pearl's wound more thoroughly, applying a poultice that smelled of pine and herbs. As dusk approached, they continued their journey, following the ravine as it curved westward. The going was difficult, the ravine bottom strewn with rocks and fallen timber, but it provided excellent concealment from anyone searching from above. Night had fully fallen by the time Finn called a halt. They had reached a point where the ravine widened into a small, sheltered valley. A stand of aspens provided cover, and the stream had deepened enough to offer fresh water. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he decided. "Then continue under cover of darkness." They made a cold camp, not daring to risk a fire. Walking Flower treated their injuries again, paying special attention to Sarah, whose fever had returned. Pearl sat with her back against an aspen trunk, cradling her injured arm. Finn settled beside her, offering a strip of dried venison from his dwindling supplies. "You should eat something." Pearl accepted it gratefully, suddenly aware of her hunger. "Thank you for everything." He shook his head slightly. "You were the one who saved us back there. That shot at Wilson bought us the time we needed." "We saved each other," she corrected softly. In the moonlight filtering through the trees, she could see the exhaustion etched on his face. Without thinking, she reached out with her good hand and gently touched his cheek. Finn went perfectly still, his eyes finding hers in the darkness. "Pearl," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "When this is over, SHH, she interrupted, placing a finger against his lips. "Not yet. When we're truly safe, then we'll talk about what comes after." He captured her hand in his, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm that sent warmth cascading through her. For that brief moment, the danger, the pain, the uncertainty all faded away, leaving only the connection between them. The moment was broken by Alina's approach. "I hate to interrupt," she said, a knowing look in her eyes, "but Sarah's asking for you, Pearl." Pearl reluctantly withdrew her hand and rose to check on her friend. Sarah lay wrapped in blankets, her face pale in the moonlight. "We made it," she asked weakly. "Almost," Pearl assured her, smoothing damp hair from her forehead. "Just a little further." Sarah managed a faint smile. "I dreamed of new hope, women walking freely, no fear in their eyes." "It won't be a dream much longer," Pearl promised. "Now rest. You'll need your strength." After Sarah drifted back to sleep, Pearl rejoined Finn, who was studying the stars. "Clear night," he commented. "Good for traveling." "We should move out in an hour or so." "How much further?" "If we keep a steady pace through the night, we could reach the Red River by dawn. Then it's just a matter of following it north to the settlement." Pearl nodded, relief washing through her. "Do you think Thomas's men will continue the pursuit?" "Hard to say. With Thomas dead and several wounded, they might decide it's not worth the effort." His expression remained cautious. "But we can't count on that." They set out again shortly after midnight, Finn once more carrying Sarah while the others followed in a line. The ravine eventually gave way to rolling hills, making travel easier but exposing them more to potential pursuit. They saw no signs of the miners, however, and by the time the eastern sky began to lighten, they had covered several miles. "There," Finn said as they crested a rise, pointing to a ribbon of water visible in the valley below. Even in the pre-dawn light, the distinctive reddish banks were visible. The Red River. New energy surged through Pearl despite her exhaustion and pain. "We're close. About 10 miles now," Finn confirmed. "If we push hard, we can be there by mid-morning." They descended to the river, pausing to refill their water containers and wash dust from their faces. The cool water revived Pearl's spirits, and even Sarah seemed slightly stronger after drinking deeply. As the sun rose fully above the horizon, they followed the river northward, keeping to the shelter of the trees that lined its banks. Birds called from the branches above them, and once they spotted a doe with twin fawns drinking from the opposite shore. "It's beautiful here," Pearl commented, walking beside Finn, who had fashioned a better stretcher for Sarah from branches and blankets. "It is," he agreed, his gaze taking in the countryside with appreciation. "Good land, too fertile soil, plenty of water." "Have you thought about settling somewhere?" she asked tentatively. "Finding a place of your own," a thoughtful expression crossed his face. "Been considering it lately." The ranging life gets lonely after a while. Before Pearl could respond, Elena called from her position as rear guard. "Riders, coming fast along the river." Finn immediately directed them into the cover of a dense thicket. Peering through the branches, Pearl could make out 3 horsemen following their trail along the riverbank. "Miller's men," she whispered. Finn shook his head slowly. "Don't think so. Different horses, different riding style." As the riders drew closer, Pearl could see they were indeed strangers, 2 men and, surprisingly, a woman in riding clothes. All were armed, moving with the watchful alertness of experienced frontierspeople. When they reached the spot where Pearl and the others had left the riverbank, the riders pulled up, examining the ground. "Looking for our trail," Finn murmured. "But they're not acting like they mean us harm." After a brief consultation, the woman rider raised her hand and called out, "Hello, the thicket, we know you're there. We're from New Hope, looking for Finn Reynolds and some women he's bringing in." Pearl and Finn exchanged startled glances. "How would they know?" she whispered. "Catherine must have scouts out," Finn replied. "She always seems to know what's happening in her territory." Standing, he stepped partially out of cover. "Catherine, that you?" The woman rider pushed back her hat, revealing gray-streaked hair and a weathered, handsome face. "Finn Reynolds. Should have known you'd spot us before we spotted you. We got word from Walking Flower's son that you were bringing in some folks who needed help." Finn gestured for the others to emerge from hiding. "Perfect timing, Catherine. We've got wounded that need attention." Catherine Barlow dismounted swiftly, her keen eyes taking in their bedraggled condition. "Looks like you've had a rough journey." Her gaze lingered on Pearl's bandaged arm and Sarah's pale face. "Jacob," she called to one of her companions, "ride ahead and tell Doc Evans to prepare for patients." The younger rider nodded and spurred his horse northward. "We brought an extra mount," Catherine continued, "but I see you'll need more. Thomas, double back to the settlement and bring the wagon. Meet us halfway." As the second rider departed, Catherine approached Pearl, her expression warm but assessing. "You must be the ladies Finn's been risking his neck for. I'm Catherine Barlow, founder of New Hope." Pearl introduced herself and the others, noting how the older woman's gaze softened when she saw Marion's baby. "You're safe now," Catherine assured them. "New Hope's less than 2 hours from here, and nobody crosses our borders without permission." "There are men following us," Elena warned. "Miners from Copper Creek. They've already attacked us once." Catherine's expression hardened. They won't get within 5 miles of our settlement. We've got watchtowers and riders patrolling constantly. She helped them make a more comfortable arrangement for Sarah, then shared food and water from her saddlebags. As they waited for the wagon, Catherine explained more about New Hope. We started with 12 women 8 years ago, she told them. Now we're over 100 strong with our own laws and governance. Every woman has a voice and a vote. We trade with nearby settlements, but no man stays overnight without specific permission. And they respect that? Marion asked skeptically. Catherine smiled grimly. They learn to. We're all handy with rifles and we support each other. Makes a difference when women stand together. Pearl noticed Finn listening quietly, a thoughtful expression on his face. When their eyes met, he gave her a small, reassuring smile that warmed her from within. The wagon arrived mid-morning, driven by Thomas and accompanied by 2 armed women riders. With great care, they transferred Sarah to the wagon bed, made comfortable with blankets and pillows. Walking Flower rode with her, continuing to administer herbal remedies. Marion and Alina joined them while Pearl found herself riding beside Finn at the rear of their small procession. Catherine seems remarkable, Pearl commented as they rode. She is, Finn agreed. Toughest woman I've ever known, but fair. She'll make sure you're all taken care of. And you? Pearl asked, the question that had been weighing on her heart finally finding voice. What will you do once we reach New Hope? Finn was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I've been thinking about that, he said finally. Maybe it's time I stopped wandering. Found somewhere to put down roots. Hope fluttered in Pearl's chest. Any particular place in mind? His eyes met hers, clear and direct. There's good land near New Hope. Not too close to trouble the ladies' rules, but near enough for visiting. Pearl's breath caught. That sounds like a fine idea. Course, I'd need a good reason to stay, he continued, his voice softening. Something worth building a life around. Or someone, Pearl suggested, her heart racing. A slow smile spread across Finn's face, reaching his eyes and transforming his features. Pearl Davis, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that when a man saves your life, stands between you and harm, and looks at you the way you've been looking at me. She felt a blush warming her cheeks. Well, it seems foolish not to at least consider the possibilities. Possibilities, he repeated, his smile widening. I like the sound of that. Before he could say more, they crested a rise and New Hope came into view below them. Set in a fertile valley, the settlement was larger than Pearl had imagined, at least 30 buildings arranged around a central square, with fenced fields and orchards surrounding them. A watchtower stood at each corner of the settlement, and Pearl could see women standing guard, rifles gleaming in the sunlight. It's beautiful, she breathed. It's home, Catherine called back to them, for as long as you need it to be. They rode down into the valley, following a well-maintained road toward the settlement. As they approached, Pearl saw women emerging from houses and workshops, coming to greet them. Many carried tools or wore work clothes, blacksmith's aprons, carpenter's belts, gardening gloves, evidence of the self-sufficiency Catherine had described. At the settlement's entrance, a wooden arch bore the words New Hope carved in simple, elegant letters. As they passed beneath it, Pearl felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, the burden of fear she had carried for so long. The next days passed in a blur of new experiences. Sarah was taken to the infirmary, where a skilled female doctor tended her wound. Within days, her fever broke for good, and she began a slow recovery. Marion and her baby were given a small house to share with Alina, while Walking Flower chose to stay with relatives in a nearby Cheyenne encampment that had a peaceful trading relationship with New Hope. Pearl was offered accommodations in the settlement's guest house, a comfortable building where visitors stayed while deciding whether to join the community permanently. Her arm healed quickly under the doctor's care, leaving only a thin scar as a reminder of their journey. True to Catherine's word, every woman in New Hope had a role and a voice. Pearl found herself drawn to the schoolhouse, where she assisted the teacher with younger children. Her education, limited though it had been, was still more extensive than many frontier women had received, and she discovered a genuine joy in helping children learn. Finn, as a man, stayed outside the settlement proper, camping near the river. He visited daily, however, bringing game for the community and helping with repairs to buildings and fences. Pearl noticed that despite New Hope's rules about male visitors, Catherine seemed to make exceptions for him, allowing him to stay later than other men who came to trade. A week after their arrival, Pearl was working in the schoolhouse garden when Finn appeared at the fence. He looked different, somehow freshly shaved, wearing a clean shirt, his dark hair neatly trimmed. "Good afternoon, Miss Davis," he called, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Might I have a word?" Pearl brushed soil from her hands and approached the fence. "You're looking rather formal today, Mr. Reynolds." "Special occasion," he replied, his expression turning serious. "I've been talking with Catherine about something important." "Oh." Pearl tried to keep her tone casual, though her heart had begun to race. "I've put in a claim for land about a mile west of here. Good spot, creek running through it, fertile soil, enough timber for building." He hesitated, then continued. "Catherine's approved it, says she's happy to have a friendly neighbor who respects their boundaries." "That sounds wonderful," Pearl said sincerely. "You'll make a fine farmer, I think." "Maybe." He looked down for a moment, then met her gaze directly. "Thing is, I don't know the first thing about making a home. Been ranging too long, living rough." He took a deep breath. "I could use some help. A partner." Pearl's breath caught. "Finn Reynolds, are you asking what I think you're asking?" He reached through the fence, taking her hand in his. "Pearl Davis, you're the bravest, strongest woman I've ever known. You deserve a life of your own choosing, and if you choose to build that life alongside mine, I'd be the happiest man in the territory." Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and unexpected. "Are you proposing marriage, Ranger?" "I am," he said, a smile breaking across his face. "Though I'm not a ranger anymore, just a man asking a remarkable woman to share his life." Pearl squeezed his hand, tears of happiness blurring her vision. "Then my answer is yes. Yes, I'll marry you, Finn Reynolds." His smile widened to a grin. "Catherine said you might agree. She's already offered to perform the ceremony if you're willing. New Hope has its own traditions for such things." "I'd be honored," Pearl replied, "though I insist on one condition." "Name it." "Eleanor, Sarah, and Marion must be welcome in our home any time they wish. They're my family now." "Our family," Finn corrected gently, "and they'll always have a place with us." 2 weeks later, Pearl stood beneath a flowering apple tree in New Hope's central square. Beside her, Finn looked handsome and slightly nervous in a new suit acquired from the settlement's trading post. Before them, Catherine Barlow presided over the ceremony, her strong voice carrying to the gathered community. "In New Hope, we believe marriage should be a partnership of equals," she declared. "A union freely chosen, based on respect and love rather than ownership or obligation." Pearl glanced at Finn, her heart swelling with emotion. How different this was from her first marriage, a transaction between her father and Thomas Miller, her own wishes irrelevant. "Finn Reynolds," Catherine continued, "do you pledge to honor Pearl's freedom and independence even as you join your life with hers? To stand beside her rather than above her, to hear her voice as equal to your own?" "I do," Finn answered, his eyes never leaving Pearl's face. "For as long as I live." Pearl Davis, You pledge to join your life with Finn's freely and without reservation. To build together a home based on mutual respect and care. I do, Pearl replied, her voice clear and certain. With all my heart. Catherine smiled, looking out at the assembled women of New Hope and the few male visitors who had been permitted to attend. Then by the authority granted to me by this community, I declare you husband and wife. May your union bring you joy and strength for all your days. As Finn leaned down to kiss her, Pearl felt the last shadows of her past finally fade away. In their place stood a future bright with possibility, a home of her own choosing, a husband who respected her strength rather than seeking to break it, a community that valued women's voices. That evening, they celebrated with a community feast in the square. Sarah, still moving carefully but steadily recovering, danced with one of Catherine's rangers. Alina discussed plans to open a dressmaking shop in New Hope. Marion, her baby on her hip, spoke animatedly with the settlement's midwife about training as her assistant. As twilight fell, Pearl and Finn slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand toward the western ridge where their new home would stand. The foundation was already laid. Finn had been working on it daily while Pearl completed her teaching assignments. "What do you think?" he asked as they stood looking down at the simple rectangular outline. "It's small to start with, but we can add rooms as needed." "It's perfect," Pearl said, leaning against his shoulder. "Room to grow." He wrapped an arm around her waist, drawing her closer. "I never thought I'd find this," he admitted quietly. "After my sister, I couldn't see beyond the next horizon, the next job, just kept moving. And now I want to build something lasting. With you." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I meant what I said in those woods, Pearl. You're free now as long as I stand. Free to choose your path, to speak your mind, to live as you see fit." Pearl reached up to touch his face, marveling at how far they had both come. "What I choose is this, our home, our life together. Not because I need your protection, but because together we're stronger than either of us alone." As the first stars appeared above them, Finn drew her into his arms. Their kiss was a promise of respect, of partnership, of a love freely given and freely accepted. 5 years later, Pearl stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Finn taught their 3-year-old daughter to ride her first pony. Beside them, Sarah's husband, a quiet blacksmith who had settled near New Hope 2 years earlier, supervised their own young son's attempts to climb the corral fence. Alina called from the doorway behind her, "Stew's almost ready." And Marion's just arrived with that new baby of hers. Pearl smiled, taking in the scene before her. New Hope had grown, now boasting over 200 residents. While it remained primarily a women's settlement, the rules had evolved to allow families to build homes within its expanding boundaries. Men who demonstrated respect for the community's values were welcomed as full citizens, with the same rights and responsibilities as the women. Finn had kept his promise. Their marriage was truly a partnership. They worked the land together, made decisions together, raised their daughter with the understanding that her voice mattered as much as any man's. When Pearl had established a proper school in their growing community, he had supported her completely, taking on extra farm work to give her time for teaching. As twilight approached, they gathered around the long table on the porch. Pearl and Finn, their daughter Rose, Alina and her new husband, a widower with 2 sons who had found New Hope while trading furs, Sarah and her blacksmith with their children, Marion and her growing family. Walking Flower joined them occasionally, though she had chosen to remain with her people, serving as an important link between the two communities. Later, as the children played in the yard and the adults lingered over coffee, Pearl found herself watching Finn. The years of hard work had added new lines to his face, but his eyes still held the same gentle strength that had first drawn her to him. Feeling her gaze, he turned and smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. No words were needed between them, just the quiet understanding of two people who had found in each other not just safety, but true partnership. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Pearl felt a profound gratitude wash over her. From the desperate flight that had brought them together to this moment of peaceful contentment, they had built something precious and rare, a life of freedom, respect, and enduring love.